Hello, Aries, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want you to settle in for a moment because this reading feels different. There is a very strong emotional energy surrounding this connection, and honestly, it feels like someone has been trying to stay strong for a very long time. Someone has been fighting their feelings, fighting their heart, fighting the pull that keeps bringing them back to you. But something is changing. The silence doesn't feel the same anymore. The distance doesn't feel as comfortable as it once did. And for many of you, this reading may reveal a truth you've already felt deep inside, but could never fully explain. So before we dive in, I have a question for you. If this person could tell you one honest thing right now, what would you want to hear? Let me know in the comments below. I always love reading your thoughts. All right, Aries, take a deep breath, trust your intuition, and let's see what the cards want to reveal today. The very first thing I notice is that someone is carrying a lot more emotion than they're letting on. Yeah, they may look fine on the outside. They may be going through their daily routine, answering messages, showing up to work, talking to people, smiling when they're supposed to smile. But underneath all of that, there is something heavy sitting on their heart. The Six of Cups keeps pulling my attention back to the past. Not because this person is stuck there. Not because they're refusing to move forward, but because certain memories refuse to let go of them. It's almost like they keep finding you in ordinary moments. A song comes on. A familiar street appears. Someone says a phrase you used to say, and suddenly they're right back there again. Back in a moment they thought they had already moved beyond. Back in a feeling they thought time would eventually erase. But it didn't. If anything, it grew stronger. And that's the strange part. Because the distance was supposed to help. The silence was supposed to make everything easier. The separation was supposed to create clarity. Yet every mile between you seems to have made your presence even louder inside their mind. That's what feels so significant here. I keep seeing someone trying very hard to maintain control. Trying to convince themselves that they're okay. Trying to convince themselves that they've accepted everything. But then the moon appears. And suddenly all of those carefully organized emotions begin floating to the surface. Feelings they never said out loud. Questions they never answered. Words they wanted to send but never sent. The kind of emotions that show up when the world gets quiet and nobody else is around. Late at night. Early in the morning. Those moments when a person can no longer distract themselves from what they're truly feeling. And honestly, Aries, I don't think this person expected you to affect them this deeply. I really don't. There is something about your energy that continues to stay with them. Not in a dramatic way. Not in an obsessive way. More like a presence. A memory that feels alive. A connection that never fully disappeared. The Nine of Swords tells me that this has been weighing on them for longer than they admit. Some of you may have felt this energetically. Like someone thinking about you from a distance. Like someone trying not to reach out. Trying not to look. Trying not to care. But caring anyway. Because the heart doesn't always cooperate with the plans the mind creates. And that's exactly what I'm seeing here. A battle between what they feel and what they believe they should feel. A battle between pride and vulnerability. Between silence and honesty. Between staying where they are and admitting that something still matters. Oh my God, for some of you, this person keeps replaying one specific conversation. One specific memory. One specific moment where everything could have gone differently. It's almost like they return to it again and again, searching for something they missed. Searching for the version of themselves that might have made a different choice. And while they're doing that, the Page of Cups quietly steps into the reading. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just softly. Like the beginning of a thought. The beginning of a feeling. The beginning of someone finally becoming honest with themselves. Because what I'm seeing is not somebody who has stopped caring. It's somebody who is getting tired of pretending they don't. And the more they sit with these emotions, the harder it becomes to keep carrying them alone. Something inside this person is beginning to shift. Very slowly. Very quietly. But it is shifting. Because for the first time in a long time, they may finally be asking themselves a question they have been avoiding all along. What happens if they stop running from what they truly feel? A realization begins to settle in, and it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small moments.
Quiet moment.
The kind that catch a person off guard when they least expect it. Because what I'm seeing here is someone reaching a crossroads within themselves. Not a dramatic crossroads that everyone can see, not something they announce to the world. This feels deeply personal. The judgment card is sitting here, and honestly, it feels like a wake-up call they can no longer ignore. For a long time, they were able to push certain thoughts away. They could distract themselves, stay busy, tell themselves that enough time had passed, tell themselves that everything happened for a reason and that life simply moved on. But lately, something has changed. The distractions aren't working the way they used to. The noise around them has become quieter. And in that silence, they're finally hearing their own heart. Yeah, that's what this feels like. Not an external awakening, an internal one. A moment where somebody suddenly realizes that avoiding the truth is still a choice. And every day they continue avoiding it, the heavier it becomes. I keep seeing them reflecting on conversations that once seemed insignificant. Words they dismissed. Feelings they minimized. Moments they thought they would forget. Yet those moments keep returning. Not because they're haunted by the past, because they're beginning to understand it differently. The Ace of Swords appears here like a flash of clarity, almost like someone looking through a window that was covered in fog for months. The view was always there. They just couldn't see it clearly before. And what they're seeing is changing everything. They're starting to understand the role you played in their life. Not just what you gave them, not just how you loved them, but how much of themselves they discovered through you. Okay, this is where things become emotional. Because I don't think they expected this realization. I don't think they expected your absence to teach them something they couldn't learn while you were standing right beside them. There is a feeling of surprise here. A feeling of, how did I miss this? And once that question appears, others begin following behind it. What was I running from? Why was I resisting? Why did I convince myself that distance was easier? The answers aren't arriving immediately. But the questions are becoming impossible to silence. The Wheel of Fortune is turning quietly in the background of this reading. I can feel movement, not rushed movement, not chaotic movement, natural movement, like a season slowly changing. Like the first signs of daylight before the sun actually rises. You know, sometimes life reaches a point where everything that has been standing still suddenly begins moving at the same time. And that's the energy surrounding this person. The emotional walls that once felt permanent don't seem as solid anymore. Old beliefs are starting to crack. Old fears are losing their grip. The version of themselves that was comfortable hiding behind uncertainty is becoming harder and harder to maintain. And as all of this unfolds, the Temperance card keeps drawing my attention. Because despite everything happening internally, there is also a sense of balance trying to emerge. This person isn't being pushed. They aren't being forced. They're slowly coming into alignment with something they've been resisting for a very long time. Almost like two parts of themselves that have been fighting are finally sitting down together. One part wants safety. The other wants truth. One part wants control. The other wants connection. And for the first time, neither side seems interested in winning the argument. They simply want peace. Oh my God. Some of you may already be feeling this shift. Not through words. Not through actions, but energetically. Because when someone starts changing from the inside, the energy between two people often begins changing first. There's a softness appearing here, a willingness to look deeper, a willingness to stop blaming circumstances and start looking honestly at the choices that created them. And the more honest this person becomes with themselves, the harder it becomes to deny what this connection has truly meant to them. Because another question is beginning to surface. A question that feels much bigger than all the others. And once that question fully reaches the surface, nothing inside them will look quite the same anymore. A memory catches them completely off guard one day, and instead of pushing it away, they finally sit with it. Not for a few seconds. Not long enough to distract themselves afterward. They actually stay there. They let themselves feel it. And that's when everything starts looking different. Because the moment they stop protecting themselves from the truth, they begin seeing you through a new lens. The star appears here, and the energy around it feels incredibly gentle. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. It's almost like they're looking back over the entire connection and realizing how much light you brought into places they didn't even know were dark. Sometimes people don't recognize what they've been given until it's no longer standing right in front of them. That's what this feels like. There were moments when your kindness seemed ordinary to them. Moments when your patience seemed expected. Moments when your support felt like something that would always be there. But distance has a strange way of revealing value. And suddenly they're noticing things they never fully appreciated before. The way you listened. The way you encouraged them. The way you believed in them during seasons when they barely believed in themselves. Yeah, this person is beginning to realize that your presence did far more for them than they ever acknowledged. I keep seeing them replaying situations where you stood by them quietly. Moments that seemed small at the time. Moments they barely reacted to. Yet those are the exact memories returning now. Not the grand gestures. Not the dramatic conversations. The quiet things. The things that revealed who you truly were. And every memory seems to carry the same message. You cared. You cared more than they understood. The strength card keeps pulling my attention toward their heart. Because what they're facing isn't easy. It takes courage to admit you've misunderstood someone. It takes courage to admit you've taken something valuable for granted. And honestly, that's where this person finds themselves. Standing face to face with a truth they can't explain away anymore. A truth that feels both beautiful and painful at the same time. Beautiful because they can finally see it. Painful because they didn't see it sooner. Oh my God. The regret here feels very real. Not overwhelming. Not destructive. But deep. The kind of regret that arrives when someone understands what they had only after gaining enough wisdom to appreciate it. And that's where the Five of Cups quietly enters the reading. I don't see this person punishing themselves. I see them reflecting. I see them questioning choices they once felt certain about. Wondering why they dismissed certain feelings. Wondering why they allowed fear, pride, confusion, or outside influences to cloud their judgment. Because from where they stand today, the picture looks completely different. The Queen of Wands is impossible to ignore here. And honestly, Aries, this energy feels so much like you. There is something about your spirit that continues inspiring this person. Even from a distance. Even in silence. Even without trying. You showed them what confidence looks like. What authenticity looks like. What it means to stay true to yourself when life becomes difficult. And the more they think about it, the more they realize they were never simply attracted to you. They admired you. Maybe they didn't have words for it before. Maybe they didn't fully understand it. But they're beginning to understand it now. There was something about the way you carried yourself. Something about your resilience. Something about your ability to keep moving forward without becoming bitter. And that left a much bigger impact than they ever admitted. You inspired growth in them. You challenged them. You forced them to look deeper. And that's exactly why your absence feels so noticeable. Because when someone inspires part of your evolution, you don't easily forget them. You carry pieces of what they taught you everywhere you go. The realization becomes heavier with each passing reflection. Not because they're losing hope, because they're gaining clarity. For the first time, they're no longer viewing this connection through the lens of fear. They're beginning to see it through the lens of truth. And the truth is revealing something that feels impossible to ignore. Something that makes their chest tighten every time they think about it. Because the more honestly they look at your place in their life, the more one uncomfortable question refuses to leave them alone. What if they spent all this time underestimating someone who was far more important than they ever realized? A moment arrives when they can no longer explain away what they're feeling. Not because somebody forces them to face it. Not because they suddenly receive all the answers. Something inside simply reaches its limit. And that's where the Tower enters this reading. The energy shifts immediately. I don't mean chaos in the dramatic sense. I mean truth. Raw truth. The kind that crashes through the walls a person spent years building around themselves. Because what I'm seeing is somebody who thought they had everything under control. Somebody who believed they could manage their emotions by keeping them locked away. They convinced themselves they were protecting their peace, protecting their future, protecting their heart. But all they really did was postpone a conversation they eventually had to have with themselves. And that conversation is happening now. The walls are shaking. The excuses are falling apart. The stories they've been telling themselves don't fit anymore. There comes a point where a person becomes exhausted from carrying a version of reality that no longer feels true. That's exactly what this feels like. They've spent so much energy trying not to look directly at this connection, trying not to acknowledge how much it changed them, trying not to admit how deeply you affected their life. But the tower doesn't leave much room for avoidance. Everything they pushed aside begins demanding attention. Every feeling, every memory, every missed opportunity. And suddenly, they're standing in the middle of a truth they can no longer escape. Oh my God, the emotion here feels intense. Because for some of them, they're beginning to understand that certain choices created consequences they never anticipated. Not because they were intentionally trying to hurt anyone, not because they were a bad person, but because fear has a way of convincing people that postponing a decision is somehow safer than making one. And yet, every postponed decision eventually becomes a decision of its own. That's what they're realizing. The weight of what wasn't said. The weight of what wasn't chosen. The weight of what was left unfinished. The hermit appears here, and everything becomes very quiet. I see someone withdrawing from noise. Stepping away from distractions. Not to run anymore. To understand. For the first time, they're asking questions that require genuine honesty. Questions without easy answers. Questions that force them to look directly at themselves. What was I afraid of? Why did I keep resisting what felt real? Why did I trust fear more than my own heart? And the deeper they go, the more difficult it becomes to blame circumstances. Because the answers keep leading them back to the same place. Back to the choices they made when they were uncertain. Back to the moments they ignored their intuition. Back to the moments they chose comfort over vulnerability. Yeah. This feels like somebody looking into a mirror and finally seeing everything clearly. Not just their mistakes. Not just their regrets. Their growth too. Because even though this energy is intense, it doesn't feel hopeless. It feels transformative. The Death card is moving through this reading with incredible force. Not as an ending, as a release, a shedding, a dismantling of old versions of themselves. Versions built on avoidance. Versions built on fear. Versions built on believing they had endless time to figure things out. Those versions are becoming harder and harder to hold on to. And honestly, I think part of them already knows that. I think they can feel it. The old narrative is collapsing. The old identity is collapsing. The old belief system is collapsing. Something more authentic is trying to emerge. Something more honest. Something more aligned with what they truly feel. The Judgment card returns, and its presence feels even stronger than before. Because this isn't simply about realizing what happened. It's about realizing what happens next inside of them. The awakening is no longer theoretical. It's personal. It's emotional. It's unavoidable. I keep seeing someone sitting alone with their thoughts, and instead of running from them, they're finally listening. Really listening. And what they hear changes everything. Because beneath all the fear, beneath all the confusion, beneath all the pride, there has always been a truth waiting patiently to be acknowledged. A truth that remained unchanged no matter how much distance existed. A truth that survived every attempt to silence it. And the closer they get to admitting that truth, the more they begin understanding that this entire transformation was never really about losing control. It was about finding the courage to stop hiding from what their heart has known all along. A quiet surrender begins taking place inside of them. Not the kind of surrender that feels like defeat. The kind that comes when a person finally stops fighting themselves. Because after everything they've been carrying, after every layer that has fallen away, there isn't much left to hide behind anymore. And honestly, that feels like the most beautiful part of this entire reading. The Lovers appears, and the energy changes again. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy. Not because every question disappears. But because something inside this person is becoming incredibly clear. They're no longer trying to decide whether these feelings exist. They're no longer trying to explain them away. They're no longer searching for reasons to dismiss them. The conversation has shifted. The battle has shifted. What once felt confusing is beginning to feel undeniable. And for many of you, what I'm seeing here is someone realizing that the connection itself was never the problem. The fear surrounding it was. The vulnerability was. The possibility of being hurt was. The possibility of losing something meaningful was. But the connection? That was never the issue. Yeah, that's a realization that changes everything. Because once someone stops fighting the feeling, they can finally start understanding it. I keep seeing them looking back at your journey together from an entirely different perspective. Not through the lens of disappointment. Not through the lens of fear. Through gratitude. And that shift is huge. Because gratitude softens things. Gratitude opens doors that pride keeps locked. Gratitude allows someone to see value where they once focused only on problems. The King of Cups sits here with remarkable steadiness. And honestly, this feels like emotional maturity arriving after a very long journey. Not perfection. Not certainty. Just honesty. For perhaps the first time, this person is allowing themselves to feel everything without immediately trying to control it. Without judging it. Without suppressing it. They're letting the emotions exist. And in doing so, they're discovering something surprising. The emotions aren't their enemy. The feelings aren't something they need to defeat. The feelings have been trying to guide them all along. Oh my God, there is such a peaceful energy developing here. Because I don't see panic anymore. I don't see resistance. I see acceptance. The kind of acceptance that arrives after a person spends a long time trying to outrun what was always meant to be acknowledged. And as that acceptance grows, they begin noticing something else. No comparison feels meaningful anymore.
No distraction feels satisfying anymore.
No substitute feels real anymore. Because every time they measure another connection against what they experience with you, something feels missing. Not because you're perfect. Not because anyone is perfect. But because what existed between the two of you carried something uniquely meaningful to them. Something authentic. Something alive. The Two of Cups enters the reading almost like a quiet conversation between two hearts. Not a conversation filled with dramatic declarations. A conversation built on recognition. Recognition of what was shared. Recognition of what was learned. Recognition of what still matters. And that's where healing begins appearing. Not healing because the past disappears. Healing because the past is finally understood. You know, sometimes healing isn't about forgetting. It's about seeing things clearly enough that they no longer need to be avoided. That's what this feels like. A soft return to truth. A soft return to emotional honesty. A soft return to what genuinely matters. Temperance is standing right in the center of all this energy, and it feels like balance is slowly being restored. The pieces are no longer fighting each other. Heart and mind are no longer moving in opposite directions. Fear is no longer making every decision. Something much calmer is emerging. Something much wiser. And with that wisdom comes an awareness that love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes love is recognizing who consistently brought light into your life, who challenged you to grow, who remained important even when distance tried to convince you otherwise. The Ten of Cups fills the final moments of this reading with warmth. Not because every outcome is written in stone, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, because there is hope here. There is emotional fulfillment here. There is a vision of what becomes possible when people stop hiding from the truth of their own hearts. And the strongest feeling I'm left with is this. They finally understand that what made you unforgettable was never one moment, one conversation, or one memory. It was who you were, your spirit, your resilience, your heart, the way you loved without trying to be anyone other than yourself. And somewhere deep inside, that realization is creating a sense of peace neither of you could fully reach before. So, as this energy settles, allow yourself to breathe. Allow yourself to trust your own journey. Because some connections teach us who we are. Some connections change us forever. And sometimes, the greatest healing begins the moment we stop running from love and start honoring the truth it revealed within us. There is a calmness surrounding this reading that I can't ignore. Almost like two hearts finally understanding something they weren't ready to understand before. And whether this connection finds its way back together or simply leaves behind a beautiful lesson, one thing feels very clear. Nothing about this journey was meaningless. Every feeling, every challenge, every moment of growth carried a purpose. So allow yourself to release what no longer needs to be carried. Allow yourself to receive the love, wisdom, and healing this experience has offered. And remember, the right things never need to be forced. What is meant for you will always find a way to reach you when the time is right. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. You all mean a lot to me, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.